What are all of the things that people love about democracy? Representation, power being held accountable, freedom, rule of law. Let's break down how democracy guarantees none of these things, and monarchy does. Representation. The only representative of a people is their leader. How can anyone else represent a group of people? People can be similar to each other in many ways, but people are still individuals. All groups have some degree of infighting. All groups have some degree of disagreement between each other. Even if everyone in a group shares a common history, bloodline, religion, upbringing, etc., just plucking one person out of that group and saying, this person represents all of them, wouldn't be fair or accurate. All groups have leaders. Groups are their leaders, and leaders are their groups. What is the group doing right now? What will the group do next? How does the group act? Etc. Only the leader can answer these questions. That is why the only true representative of a group is its leader. You think that voting for someone and then sending them far away to another city means that they lead you or represent you? Since when has your senator or House member been a leader to you? Do you even know who your senators and House members are? Or did you just vote for someone and then never hear from them again? You really call that representation? In a democracy, you don't have leaders, only politicians. But you know who is a leader? Your king. His power is visible, it is certain, it is felt. I say this all the time. That's all a king really is, a leader. The leader. And as the leader, as king, all eyes are upon him. Everyone knows who he is, everyone knows what to expect from him, and he has to make a lot of people happy. Everyone, in fact. Kings bear enormous pressure to do well, unlike politicians who simply get elected and then get to disappear into the crowd of other useless politicians. Holding power accountable. Let's run through a short list of things our politicians have done without the approval of the people, oftentimes in spite of the people. The Constitution itself was created in a coup. Most Americans, especially useless baby boomers, aren't aware of this. The first president of the United States was John Hanson, the president of the Continental Congress. America's first constitution was the Articles of Confederation. The system had such disastrous results that the Continental Congress ordered a revision of the Articles, but instead, they created a new constitution entirely, which is the Constitution we know today. They did this illegally in every sense. Were they punished in any way? No. Was the document annulled as illegitimate? No. More recent examples. The 2024 U.S. presidential election. After a disastrous televised debate with Donald Trump, the Democratic Party pressured Joe Biden to back out of the race, despite him being the nominee. Not only did Biden drop out at the last minute, but he was replaced just as quickly by Kamala Harris, without a single vote cast. The elites did this in plain sight. They didn't even attempt to hide it. I hear people say, in a democracy, you get voted out. Okay, even if that were true, when does it happen? Have you ever met a single fan of Chuck Schumer? But he's still in office. I know Mitch McConnell doesn't have any fans left, but he's still in office. Same goes for just about everyone else in Congress. But let's entertain the idea that politicians get voted out when they fuck up. How is that punishment exactly? How about the more egregious examples of elite/politician corruption, starting with COVID? So Trump, yes it was Trump, handed over our country to Anthony Fauci, and the country was locked down. It was promised to be only 2 weeks. 2 weeks to flatten the curve. And it ended up being far longer. Small business owners who lived off razor-thin profit margins as it was were forced to permanently close. People couldn't pay rent. People couldn't pay other bills. And it was all because of a virus that 99% of the population survived. I myself took zero precautions against COVID-19, and I'm still fine. So those in power forced people not to be able to get a paycheck. They gave power to a man who wasn't elected at all. And Joe Biden even attempted to force nearly all Americans to get an experimental injection. I remember at work one day when me and my coworkers gathered and we agreed that we would refuse to get the shot, even if it meant we all got fired. I think COVID was closer to civil war than people realize. That was the only time in my life that I've seen a large group of people come together, planning to directly oppose the government. And then to top things off, Joe Biden made everything better by demonizing people who refused the experimental injection. I refuse to call it a vaccine. Biden went on TV and said that refusers were the problem with America, a pandemic of the unvaccinated, they said. Almost as if he called for retaliation against us. Okay, so who got punished for anything related to COVID? We learned that Fauci actually helped fund the creation of the virus. Did he get punished? Nope. He actually got pardoned by Joe Biden. Final example, Jeffrey Epstein. That list of child predator clients still hasn't been released to the public, and it never will be. It is truly baffling how anyone thought that list would ever be released. Those in power know that that list would directly lead to their demise, so why would they do it? Why would they release it? The American people won't do a damn thing to get that list, if it still exists. Hell, the American people probably wouldn't do anything even if they had the list, but the elites just won't take that risk. They know they can hide it forever, if the list even exists still, and therefore they will eternally tease it and never release it. They do it because they can. For everyone who believes in democracy, please explain to me how it holds power accountable. When has it ever? And before you use Nixon as an example, keep in mind that Nixon wasn't directly involved in Watergate. More than anything, he was framed to appear as if he had been. And the next president, Gerald Ford, gave him a pardon anyway, when he didn't even have any convictions. So no, Nixon doesn't count. Nixon is an example of elites playing their games to gain power over each other. He is not an example of the American people getting justice. In fact, not even close. So, lovers of democracy, name an example of democracy holding power accountable, specifically when the people held power accountable. From the Reagan administration, from the Wilson administration, from the Lincoln administration, from the Washington administration, can you name any serious examples? And before you call me unfair for demanding a solid example from one or more centuries ago, remember that you're the one who loves this system. You should have examples from any time. Or do you treat all past administrations as if they did nothing wrong? You believe corruption only became a thing in recent memory, do you? You know who gets held accountable for how they use their power? That's right, kings. I know that goes against your indoctrination to despise all forms of autocracy, but it's true. First of all, just to get this out of the way, a king can't be easily corrupted like a politician. He can't be bribed with more power because he already has all the power. He can't be bribed with money because he already gets his coffers replenished regularly from taxes. How are kings held accountable, you ask? Because they have to simultaneously satisfy the wishes of the population at large and the elite class. The king is above both, and he is alone at the top. Everyone knows who to blame for anything that goes wrong. The king is surrounded by his entire kingdom, elites and peasants alike, who each have their own way to retaliate if the king steps too far out of line. About 2/3 of all kings throughout history have been killed at the hands of another person in some way. That includes assassination, rebellion, and warfare. Being king is one of the most dangerous jobs in the world, if history has anything to say about it. It should make perfect sense, too. The king holds all the power. He holds the power by birthright. He didn't get voted in, therefore you can't depose him by voting him out, which never happens anyway. If he's doing things you really don't like, the only way to get rid of him is by killing him. That is more pressure than a piece of paper like the Constitution could ever bring. A piece of paper can be interpreted into infinity. Our elites violate the damn thing all the time. Second Amendment clearly states that the right to bear arms shall not be infringed, and it's infringed all the time. A piece of paper can be interpreted into infinity, but you know what can't be? Real-life pressures and dangers. That's what keeps a king in check. Real-life pressures and dangers. Freedom and rule of law. If there's one thing you can be absolutely certain of, it's that democracy is the opposite of freedom. Just do the math. How are things decided in a democracy? A vote. What's a vote? A majority decision. Thus, mob rule. You must submit to the will of the people who outnumber you simply because they outnumber you. How does that equal freedom exactly? Oh, but we use democracy to elect representatives and we elect them to legislate how we want them to. No, once you give someone power, all you've done is give someone power. Once they have said power, they can do whatever they want because they have power. That's kind of how power works. Democracy is inherently contradictory when you think about it. The idea behind democracy is that the people have power by giving that power away. At best, democracy is just wishful thinking. You don't hand someone a gun and then say, well, because I was the one who gave that gun to you, there's no way you can misuse it. See how retarded the logic of democracy is? The only way to have freedom, the definition of which is a whole other subject of its own, in a democracy is by writing a long list of laws that sound like freedom to limit the power of the mob. And even then, that list only matters if the people in power act like it matters. They are not bound by a piece of paper. They are bound by whatever it is they want to choose to do. Their only restrictions at the end of the day is getting other elected people to agree with them, no matter what it is. Look, the elites will do as they damn well please, if that hasn't been proven enough already. You only have the illusion of freedom because you haven't gotten in their way yet. They don't care what freedoms you think you have, just don't get in their way. In fact, they want you to believe you have freedom. The illusion helps keep you pacified and harmless against them. That's right. You don't have freedom because the elites have to give it to you. You have freedom because it keeps you easily controlled. There are plenty of examples of what the elite class does to people who get in their way. You need not look any further than Donald Trump, whom they've tried to imprison and assassinate, or MLK, or JFK, whom they were successful in assassinating. Freedom is a ridiculous word. What people truly prefer is order, not freedom. It's, as I say, no nation can function without a degree of freedom and a number of restrictions on that freedom. You don't get freedom in a democracy. The best a democracy can do is pretend that its people have freedom, because government has to be bloated in a democracy. It's all artificial, it's all propaganda, it's not at all natural or authentic. Apart from the mob rule aspect, let's break down how democracy is inherently a large government system. You have a massive number of representatives, and you need voting systems for all of those representative positions. And that's all just the very basics. There's also the human nature aspect of democracy, which guarantees the people will vote for their own self-interests and try to exert power over everyone, which inevitably leads to the creation of department after department after department. And all of those departments need to be staffed, and they need their own branches operating in every last square mile of the nation. People are selfish. They vote selfish. There's only going to be more laws over time, not fewer. And the more laws there are, the more complex your system has to be to maintain and enforce those laws. Oh yeah, and then there's the hassle of paying for all of this. So you need a department handling tax intake and expenditure. And you're going to need to tax the people quite a large percentage as well, because all these politicians and departments and law enforcement, all of this bloated government is naturally quite expensive. And that's not even taking other things into account, like the military. Look, I'm not going to get through it all. Democracy requires a bloated government. That's unavoidable. So, how people think democracy equals freedom is quite baffling, and that's just putting it nicely. In a monarchy, however, since the king is the law and the law is the king, the law is simpler. And since the king is only one person, he couldn't have a vast bureaucratic apparatus even if he wanted to. One ruler means a more focused, precise government. Also, a simplified rule of law means less room to interpret the law as you see fit. Fewer people making laws, fewer people interpreting the law. Does that not sound more like freedom than a bloated government? It's astonishing how people, especially Americans, believe so strongly that power from one is inherently tyrannical and the power of thousands somehow isn't. It's the complete reverse of what's true. Lovers of democracy never stop to think about the limits of one person running everything. He's just one guy. When you think of dictators, they were only able to be dictators because most of the time the systems that they were using were meant for vast bureaucratic networks. They simply usurped the system. They are not the system themselves. Not to mention all the things that they have to do to maintain their power when it's completely illegitimate. With a king, it's completely legitimate. When you think of a dictator, they usually come from democracies, where they have loads of assemblies and committees already, and all of that nonsense. When one man has all the authority by birthright and by the law of the land, there is no attempt to mask his power. He displays it openly. A monarch is not an ideologue. He's simply the rightful ruler. He is not meant to lead his people to a glorious utopia. His lords and whatnot are only there to help him enforce his rule. So where does all this love for democracy come from? Propaganda. That's really it. That's really it. Americans, for example, still believe the retarded lie that the United States was founded on a rebellion against tyranny. George III was not a tyrant, and it wasn't even George that the colonies were fighting, it was Parliament. George was barely even involved. The colonies started that fight, and for ridiculous reasons. Just because George sided with Parliament doesn't mean he was a tyrant. America was founded on an obvious and ridiculous lie. It's astonishing that people still believe it more than 2 centuries later. Every reason Americans have to hate monarchy is based on stupid lies and stupid propaganda. Not truth, not even logic. You want representation? Embrace monarchy. You want freedom? Embrace monarchy. You want far less corrupt government? Embrace monarchy. It's the most stable and longest lasting system in history. Monarchy works. All of the others don't, especially democracy, which tends to only have a shelf life of around 250 years. Monarchies can last millennia. No democracy, not one, has ever lasted 500 years. Monarchies frequently last longer than that. Truth is, everything you love about democracy can only be found in monarchy.